Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I'm Tom Gross. Joining me, as always, is Dan Ream. Hello, Dan.
How you doing on this second day of freedom?
Oh, my goodness. I know we've got lots of teachers out there that listen to Teachers in the Dungeon. I mean, I guess it fits the title, right? But boy, happy summer, everybody. We have a great show for you today. We had the opportunity to visit with, for a second time, returning to the dungeon. We talked with 2/3 of the writing team of the Young Adventurers Guide, talking about their newest book, Artificers and Alchemy. We have Jim Zub and Stacy King on the show coming up.
Yeah, just a fun conversation. You can just, the enthusiasm they have, they're 8 books in, and you can tell they can't wait to get started on more. And they are just brimful of ideas. I'll admit, Tom, when you first showed me these books, I didn't really think much about them until I looked into them, and which, you really probably should look into books when you're when you're given them. But just the creativity on every page and the way that it just inspires. I mean, the whole point of the series is to inspire people to take the tools that D&D offers and use them to create something new and original. And it's just, it was, as I said, just inspiring to get to read these, and even more than to talk to these folks.
Right. And the popularity of the books is becoming more and more. You had noted that on Instagram, you saw a message about them.
Yes. I saw, I think Dungeon Master Moms is the Instagram handle. She had showed some images of some of the books and said it's just a little light research or something like that. And as we've mentioned, Instagram is not comment heavy, but there were several comments underneath this post saying, "Oh, I love those books. They're awesome. I can't wait to," so they are effectively, I don't want to put it, the design is sound. They are reaching, they are useful to the audience that they want to be useful to.
And so they'll say this in the interview, but these books are designed for 8 to 12-year-olds. But I'm going to tell you that I get ideas from looking at these. And it just, there's so much lore, there's so many they spend time asking questions in the book to kind of get your brain thinking. And so if you are an adult D&D player, especially a DM, but anybody, and you come across these books, don't just set them aside because they're small. They are packed with great information and interesting aspects of the game in the role play part of the game.
And I would say that really works to their advantage. I get a little intimidated by the Dungeon Master's Guide. How many pages of these magical items do I have to page through to get to something that will work for me? And this book hits the highlights and immediately gets your creative juices flowing, because they focus not on stats, but on here's how it functions. Here's how it would interact with a player, character. Right. And it's a very simple but very profound formula they've got going here.
Absolutely. And I'll just say the pictures are pretty awesome, and easily you could use them in your game.
Yes.
To support the imagery of it. So I think we've teased everybody long enough.
Yes.
I think it's time to get on to the interview. So here's our interview with Jim Zub and Stacy King. Returning to the dungeon to visit with us are the authors of the new book, In a Young Adventurer's Guide, Artificers and Alchemy, published by 10 Speed Press. I want to welcome Jim Zub and Stacy King. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's really great to be back.
Indeed. It is good to have you back. And for those who want to hear our first conversation, you can jump back in our catalog back to a Random Encounter episode that released on October 17th of 2023. That's where we talked about places and portals. Glad to have you back, but I want to start mentioning places and portals. In the time since we have visited, what is some fun feedback that you've received about that book from readers or teachers or, hey, librarians?
Sure. The nice thing about this series is that now that it's been out for, that we launched in 2019. So I guess this is our 5th year on the series, which is wild to think about. When I've been at shows, we keep hearing from all kinds of readers and dungeon masters and librarians and stuff that the series has just got a lock on the readership, that they're excited about what's in there and that it generates all kinds of fun, creative ideas. I know with Places and Portals, it kind of opens up the scope a lot of what's in there. And I think when people think about Dungeons and Dragons, if they don't know much about it, they still kind of put it into the bucket of, oh, it's high fantasy. It's going to be elves and dwarves and dragons. And I think the nice thing that Place and Portals and Artificers does is it really shows the breadth of what you can do with fantasy. Stuff like the Spelljammer, we're going to go out into space. We're going to do really funky things. Old school D&D has a really weird bent of science-y kind of sci-fi little bits, kind of science fantasy and strange surreal kind of elements. I think that that's what surprised people when they were flipping through it the most, or when they realize, oh, you can do all kinds of other things you may not have realized. It's not just typical whatever Tolkien style kind of fantasy.
Yeah, definitely. I remember in our conversation from last year, we talked a lot about the Spelljammer and how kind of, for many people, introduced that concept of, having ships in space or in the ethereal zone or the astral plane and, that kind of thing. So really cool. And I know that, anytime I have one of these books with me, your Young Adventurers Guidebooks, and someone sees it, the most common thing is, oh, I love those books because of sort of the accessibility of it.
Yeah, it's worked out really well. I know every time we get a chance to, it's been surreal, in a lot of ways. Artificers is our 8th book now in what we jokingly call book 8 of a 2-book series, so it's just like it keeps going and there's so much stuff to delve into. And I think that's what's really fun about it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Artificers and Alchemy, your new book that has recently come out. I want to start with this. Magic items are magic items. They're full of wonder, dreaming, power. I remember as a child looking through that first edition Dungeon Master's Guide and just going to the magic weapons and just reading through all of the things and like, oh, wow, this sort of be cool, or this character would use this. So for a young audience, what strategies or techniques did you use in writing this book, and really all of your books, to make the items seem even more magical and imaginative to that audience?
Ooh, that's a good question. That was actually not the direction I was expecting you to go with. So
excellent. Keeping you on your toes. I'm a good DM that way.
Absolutely. I mean, it's part of it is our job is made pretty easy, and that magic items are really exciting and fun. And the main thing is to mostly focus on getting the reader to think about the magic items they're interested in and the way that they might want to use those. So rather than kind of being just a more flat out, this is what this item does, to give a bit more of a story angle on it. This item has this background or purpose, or this connection with the world, or, with the sentient items, delving into their special purposes and how that creates a relationship between the item and the character that's wielding it that can be both good and bad. That's like any friendship you would have. It's going to have some challenges. So getting people to, getting the readers to think a little bit more about items in that way, that's more kind of story focused and also narrative and also individualized, that your relationship with this magic item is going to be unique to you and your character and the choices you make around it, rather than just whoever wields this sword would do X mission with it. It can be very different depending on who you are and the story that is unfolding out of your character and your game and your table. So yeah,
I think that's exactly it. The narrative focus of these books means that, as a gamer growing up, I would look and it's like, oh, what's the most powerful weapon? Oh, I want a +3 weapon instead of a +1 or whatever. But we're not focused on that. It's not about just, there's no statistics in these books. Mm-hmm. So we have to push the focus towards a narrative. what makes this item interesting, what makes this item fun to use, or visual in its concept, or imaginative in the way you can utilize it, whether it's as a dungeon master or as a player. And that in many ways, I think, pushes us past those bounds of just raw numbers and kind of combat strategies, which becomes the default setting on a lot of interactions with the rules. And so here it's like, I'd rather read about the immovable rod, which is such a weird, funky kind of item, and imagine how it could be used narratively, rather than it just being like, oh, this thing spits fire and it's going to hurt people or whatever. It's like, oh no, the funkier the item, the more wondrous ones are the ones that I think are the most visually interesting. They're the most narratively interesting, and they drive our readers to think about how cool it would be to have it or to use it.
Mm-hmm. But while also talking about the coolness, we do want to focus on the idea that there are pros and cons to any of those. So for like with the sentient weapons section, you're talking about Black Razor, and it's like, this is an incredibly powerful weapon, but it might corrupt you if you're a good character. So you have to be really careful. Or, the Vorpal sword. It's amazing that you might be able to just whack somebody's head off with it. But also that means you have a responsibility about when you choose to use it, because you don't want to be just pulling it out for every single fight. You have to think about, is this a fight that I'm willing to make that commitment? Yeah. And also the idea that is a commitment, that, your fights don't necessarily always have to end in a particular way, depending on how your character and your group is playing with stuff. So
yeah, it's all about just igniting our readers' imaginations. That's always the goal with the entire series. And magic items are just little ingredients that are so easy to plug into and generate ideas with.
I would just say from my own experience that you succeeded. Thumbing through the book, preparing for this, within 10 minutes, I had kind of a small existential crisis, because I thought, how have I never thought of any of these ideas? I've been DMing for 6 years, and none of these things occurred to me. I'm a failure, but now I'm going to steal all these ideas. So
no, but that's the thing. I think and there's nothing against the original rule books, but obviously they're focused on a statistical kind of element, right? Like you have to mix the flavor text with, here's what it does statistically, here's what it does strategically, here's how you need to put it on your character sheet. And we're kind of freed from those bounds where we can just focus completely on imaginatively, what can you do? What are you thinking about? And what are these bigger kind of narrative of levers that we can pull? And so it becomes a lot of fun for us, because it becomes this imaginative kind of, we're trying to outdo each other. I know when we're sitting around brainstorming.
And we're also trying to convey the idea that, like, this is what we've come up with, but there's also so much more.
Yeah.
Right. And so ideally, if you can, when you flip through the book, if you see 6 ideas that we put out there and you're like, I hadn't thought of all of that, hopefully that's also going to spring you into going, what other stuff could I do?
Right.
And that's kind of really where it becomes a springboard for imagination and creativity, and, developing your own ideas and a unique game that's all your own.
Right. Which is the whole point of tabletop role-playing games. It's like, sure, you can use whatever, Black Razor or Snicker Snacked or those specific items that are in the book, or you can go, man, I could make my own thing. I want every item could have this kind of interesting backstory and unique name and funky little pros and cons to it. So it's about showing you what those things are and designing your own magic items. It's literally a section in the book, and giving you the confidence that you can do this, that you should do this, that it makes them more memorable, more interesting, and creates the kind of stuff that your players are going to remember.
So there's a part in this is throughout the book, but I know I'm going to read a little bit of the book, and I know you wrote it, so you don't really need to hear, but for our listeners, I wanted to share, like, you guys have a lot of fun with the reader. And so I wanted to talk about the Dread Helm, and I won't read the whole description, but it made me chuckle. And I was like, okay, I can see kids really thinking this is kind of fun and funny in some ways. You say sometimes your best defense is to look really, really scary. And then you go on to describe this. And then you conclude this talk about the Dread Helm by saying, while a Dread Helm doesn't technically offer more protection than any other steel helmet, you're a lot less likely to get hit when your opponents are running away in fear,
Right?
which I think is tons of fun.
Yeah, what you want to do, I think all of us, again, when we're brainstorming this stuff, I know Stacy and Andrew in particular have been wonderful about extrapolating not just what it does in the base idea or the description, but what that means. Do you know what I mean? That instead of just saying, oh, what does it confer as a statistical advantage? It's about, okay, and therefore, what does that become? And that's what's really fun about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hit it, when you kind of chuckle yourself or you realize the possibilities in there, you kind of go, okay. Very much a similar kind of thing with the creatures. When you look in Monsters and Creatures or Beasts and Behemoths, that whole do and don't kind of bullet point thing. It's like, yes, you can just boil this down to a series of statistics, but if you take what's in the description of these creatures, where they live and what they do, and then you extrapolate it to strategies or things that you might be thinking about, it just gives you more fun buttons to push, more fun little things to play with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, for me also, I do really like the idea of challenging the conventional narrative that Dungeons and Dragons is all about, like going into a dungeon, finding monsters, killing them, and taking their stuff. Like that the game can be a lot more than that, and that your strategies in dealing with the bad guys in any given scenario can be more than just kind of a straightforward, okay, now we got to do the fighting thing. It's, so getting kids to think, in talking about magic item, that might be, this is a different way of thinking about how you might approach not just this item, but also your game as a whole. Like if you want to be big and intimidating, if you want to be charming and friendly,
or sneaky,
or like there's all kinds of things that you can do to solve your problems. They don't always have to be this one, admittedly often very satisfying solution.
Combat sort of solution. But that's where those encounter pages are also really valuable for us, because they are those little chunks of narrative where we're giving you a piece of a story. You're dropped right into the middle of a scene, and then we don't tell you how it concludes. So you get all that kind of atmospheric information and character and moment, and usually a choice that's a pivotal kind of moment. And you go, what would you do? Where could it go? It's up to you. And that's kind of the key there. And most of those are not just, do you fight? Most of those are like more complicated in terms of there are difficult choices to be made, or do you run? Do you hide? Do you, how do you use these things? And in this case, many of them centered around the magic items and how they get utilized.
And on a personal note, I just think it would be super fun to have, a pair of glasses or something that I could just flick on, activate the power, and people would just get out of my way.
That's right. That's right. But that's the thing. You have to put yourself into the head of whatever that is, or whatever it would be to utilize, and that's the whole point of role playing, right? Get into the role.
I've got a question that's a little tangential to that. So many items in Dungeon Master's Guide, no way that you could ever cover them all.
Sure.
How did you edit that down and kind of connect it to that? I notice this is a game for adults as well as for children, and you've got to walk a fine line, I'm sure, at some point with some of the properties of some of these weapons. Sure. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided what was age appropriate, how to deal with things that are a little bit on the edge, that sort of thing?
I think it's similar to when we did, like, we didn't cover all the spells when we did the Wizards and Spells book. It was about curating a variety, so a variety of effects, a variety of visuals, a variety of different ideas. For this, we didn't want a magic item that already did something that we showed in the spells book, and that it also, I think those wondrous items, that it wasn't just, here's a bunch of swords, here's a bunch of rings. It was like, how wide a span can we show?
Well, and we have also covered some magic items in previous books. Like in the Dragons and Treasures book, we covered magic items that either work to fight or control dragons, or can replicate draconic powers for a player.
And wisdom spells, we had a bunch of wands and staves and things like that as well. So it was about, okay, we've already covered a lot of, and I don't want to say generic because they're magic items, they're special, but we've covered a lot of these kind of classic items. So the great thing about Artificers and Alchemy is we can just get weird. We could do these things outside the box. We can go into different kind of places with it.
But we definitely hit a point now with the series because it's a little bit like you're traveling to your favorite holiday destination, but you've already been there several times before. So you've done kind of the big things that they tell tourists to do on their first trip. And now you're suddenly like, oh, now I get to really dig in and explore and find some of the stranger nooks and crannies in the city.
What restaurants do the locals really love that's off the beaten path? What are the little kind of areas that we can explore? Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, we did kind of sit down and go through all the past books and figure out which magic items we had previously covered.
Yeah.
And then started drafting up kind of from all the different source books the wide range of things that we actually hadn't. And then we started sort of looking at, because we knew we wanted to talk about the constructs, so we sort of divided them out and selected some magic items that would fit better into the constructs section.
Mm-hmm.
And then started kind of thinking about, well, how would these group as categories? Because we wanted to have the double page spreads. And you want to have items that have some connection, but also don't overlap too much. And then kind of did a lot of back and forth to start winding things down.
And then
and also, keeping a few that we knew we would want for future books maybe that we have in mind.
Right.
We don't want to blow this one here because that will totally fit if we get to do this book.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing too is every so often it's just one of the three of us, Andrew or Stacy or I, just have a thing that we like that is just like an old bit or a piece that is beloved from when we were kids or memorable. And you're like, you know what? I'm the author. I'm going to be indulgent. I think this is cool. And part of that excitement comes through in the text. If we are excited, we can make it more exciting for the reader. And so there's just a few, it was like when we were doing the Dungeons book and I'm like, Castle Ravenloft's the best. We got to include Castle Ravenloft, right? Like it is a big one, but it's also one of my absolute favorites, which means, okay, then we're going to have the Sun Sword and then we're going to have the, Amulet of Ravenkind and stuff like that. Like these things start to all kind of narratively hang together because we think they're cool. And so stuff like Artificers and Alchemy, I think the immovable rod is ridiculous and amazing. So I want it in there. It's fun. And I'm going to give it an encounter scene because I think it's fun. And so that's it. That's just like as simple as that.
Yeah, and I really wanted to include the section on magical prosthetics because that gave us an opening to talk about disability in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, which we haven't really kind of addressed before. And we didn't really want to make it a big deal, but we also wanted to make sure that any kids who are reading who fall into the category can feel themselves welcome at the table as well. And we thought that was a good way to kind of bring it in, not as a like, hey, let's everybody pay attention to this point right here.
But it's just part of that broader.
It's just very organically kind of included.
Yeah.
And also discussing that not everybody necessarily uses a magical prosthetic or anything at all. It's totally your call.
Yeah.
But that was something that I like on that personal preference kind of thing. I was like, I definitely want to do this. And then I realized that there are not as many prosthetic items in Dungeons and Dragons, the official lore, as I thought there were. Right? So there was a little bit about like,
okay, we got to find all the things that are going to work in there. I know stuff like constructs, we had previously left golems out of Monsters and Creatures and Beasts and Behemoths specifically because I felt like we were going to have some construct section down the road. So then it's like, great, this is the spot to really do golems. Perfect. Now we've got that, in place. So sometimes it is future proofing and other times it's a bit of kismet and you're just sort of happy that it's all fitting together. And then, it's a little bit of everything. It's instinct, it's organization, and then it's just about us all kind of brainstorming and laughing and sitting around coming up with this stuff and trying to push each other on with cooler ideas.
Yeah. And once we have kind of our process with the books is that once we develop our synopsis or outline, that's going through with both our editor at Random House and Wizards of the Coast to make sure that they actually are cool with everything that we are proposing to do. And so they're both great partners in that often they will bring up something that we haven't thought of as well. which also helps us to make sure that we're not, missing anything. And
yeah, it's nice to have the good thing too is that we've gone through this process, on 7 other books. And so we've built up a lot of trust, which is great, where we can just sort of go, it's going to be like this. And in previous books, it's not that they didn't trust us, but you've built that thing up. You've said to them, look, we're going to do this section. And I think in earlier books, they would have been like, oh, how's that going to work? And we have to explain. And now we go, okay, we're going to do this section. And they go, oh, we trust you that you've made these other ones work and these other little approaches and analyses of kind of different elements related to the theme of the book. And so they can see that we're going to find our way through most of the time. And so I think there's less questions now when we send in a proposal. It's a more straightforward process.
It's less questions and more them suggesting, hey, this is something that might be coming up in the source book that's coming out, or we can't officially tell you this yet, but you'll definitely want to slide this in there. And we're like, oh, okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Nice. When we're talking about different kind of approaches, I know when we were doing the Dragons and Treasures book, they were already building towards doing their own dragon book. And so that was perfect timing where we were able to build on a bunch of the gem dragons and things that they were going to be doing. Mm-hmm. And so that's the nice thing about it is it's all part of that partnership where we're all trying to make stuff. We want to make these as evergreen as possible because they're narrative focused. They're not rule centric. The new 2024 Player's Handbook and the DMG and the Monster Manual are coming out, and nothing that we have in these books is phased out. Everything just works. They can adjust whatever rules they need. They can add to their lore and keep building. And we've got this nice little base of this, book series that's going to keep clipping along.
As a librarian, I love that aspect of it. So I don't have to keep updating. Oh, this is volume 3. This is volume 4.
Yeah, totally. We definitely want them to be kind of edition agnostic in that broader sense that we can just, these are about igniting your imagination and then go play whatever version of the rules is at your table or at your parents' table or whatever.
So talking about igniting imagination, there's a part of it, there's a chapter or a section in this book that I was not expecting when I went to the table of contents. I'm kind of curious as to the thought process, whether it was a brainstorm, you discussed a lot on this, or all of you were like, no, we're doing that. And that was the section on peculiar phenomena. I don't know why. I never think of that when I think of magic. You had the Eldritch Storms and the Springs and mimic colonies. Are you kidding me? That is so cool. So where did that all come from?
That
was totally Andrew.
That was Andrew? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's definitely that was Andrew's brainchild. He was the one who kind of, a part of it is it's very easy. There's so many magic items. You could do multiple books of the size that we do. That are just
magic
pages and pages of magic items, but that's not really a satisfying
overview. Yeah, you want it to keep moving.
Yeah, and so we were talking about we knew that we wanted to talk about a bunch of interesting different magic items. We knew we wanted to talk about the Artificer class and constructs and designing your own magic items. All that was kind of in place, but we were struggling a little bit with it feels like we still need something more. And Andrew was the one who mentioned the environmental kind of ones, which they're not really a newer concept in Dungeons & Dragons, but the way they've been codified has been.
I think
it's a little bit newer. Previously, you might have had something like a Domain of Dread to account for that kind of thing. Now they've introduced ways that it works in kind of more a standard realm.
Yeah.
But he had been reading that particular source book and was the one who was like, we should totally do this. And also I want to do this because I really want this idea.
And again, that's the thing is that I want everyone to be passionate about this stuff. When we're breaking up the different sections, we're all kind of reading each other's material and we're editing and adding and trying to plus it as much as possible. But if someone is passionate about something, that's where I want to direct that kind of energy, right? So if you've got a good handle on this particular section, run with it, and then that's just going to make it easier.
And it's also something that we thought was really interesting thematically. It's a really interesting world building tool to give to kids. The idea that what if the world has places that reflect your emotional feelings, or where, guardian spirits are dominant, or things like that, that they can play with building into their own kind of realities.
Yeah, that magic comes in many forms.
Yeah, and it was also something that we really liked the idea of, and weren't entirely sure where else it might fit, given the books we'd already done. We were kind of like, this is something that maybe should have been in like a
Places in Portals, could have.
Yeah, or the Dungeons book,
right?
Things like that. So if we don't put it in here and it does thematically fit in here, we might miss our chance to kind of incorporate that into the series.
Yeah.
You have answered many, many of my questions. So I'm going to jump to the end of your book, because I think this is my favorite part. Being a teacher, being a librarian, your final chapter is titled "Using Magic Items to Tell Your Own Stories," which is what a concept. I mean, I don't know that anyone has ever said to me, "Hey, use your stuff to make your character who he is." And so what I really liked about it was just the idea of that chapter title, but then you ask some really engaging questions to get kids and adults like me to think about all the different things that a magic item can bring to your story. And then probably my favorite part of this was you then say, you don't have to answer all the questions by yourself. D&D is a collaborative game. So have your friends talk about it. Talk to your friends about it, which, I mean, you encapsulate so much in those like 3 pages. So can you talk a little bit about how that developed?
Sure. So almost every Young Adventurers guide, the final chapter is a series of those questions. It's almost always using whatever the theme is, monsters, using, your character to tell stories, your own stories, which I think is core to, first of all, the entire series and role-playing as a whole. It's got to be about you making stuff. And I think the mistake that some people make is that it's all about the dungeon master having to populate this world as an individual, and how difficult that can be, whether it's doing it ahead of time or spontaneously in the moment, having to come up with all this stuff. And so one of the things I've always wanted to do is put it not back on the players, but make it a more collaborative thing that is exactly that you do not have to come up with it all in the moment, and you don't have to come up with it all ahead of time, that we are making a thing. The best thing about role-playing games is that when you finish a great game, you know that none of it could have happened without everyone there. Not like you need all of their involvement. I need players, I need their excitement, I need their exuberance, their imagination, and I need that dungeon master, and they have to be working together. And so some of the most fun I've had gaming with my friends is that idea of, okay, we're in this town, you guys name the tavern, or you tell me something funky about this town, and now you feel a personal investment and involvement in that imaginative kind of story. And then I'll grab the baton and I'll run for a bit, and then I'll hand it back to you, and then you run for a bit. And so you don't have to do it all yourself. It's not just a one person's job to make this fun, or to make this entertaining, or to keep this going. It's all of us having input and all of us having fun doing it.
That is so so true, and yet so hard to remember in the moment when you're DMing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And at first I think I felt that real pressure of that classic sense of, well, I'm the god of this world, and therefore I have all the answers, right? And every so often I just realized it's so much easier if I go, oh, you tell me the bartender's name. You come up with a name, right? You tell me a funny thing, or you tell me, oh, there's heraldry on the wall. What's on the heraldry? You tell me. And then it's like, you tell me a funky thing. Oh, it's a wyvern and it's got an arrow in its mouth. And now I'll tell you the name of it. And then back and forth and back and forth. And it's like, now we've all got a little investment in that funky thing. And I bet you next session, when I bring up the bartender, everyone remembers the name, because they felt like they had a little bit of a piece to play,
Right.
That is so cool. Well, as we wrap things up, I've got 2 questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is, and I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is there anything you can tell about any potential Young Adventurer guides coming up? I know it's a dangerous question. So
yeah. The series will continue. We've got several different ideas I know that are that have been proposed, kind of back and forth. So almost all of them build on the things that have come before. We've covered a lot of the main kind of grounds of D&D in a good way. So now we get to sort of like what Stacy was saying before. We've hit all the high spots in terms of the what people expect. So now we can kind of drill down deeper and get fun and get funky with it. And that has been a real joy, whether it's more kind of cool lore stuff that I kind of love about D&D, or depth and breadth in terms of what's possible. So yeah.
And one of the pitches is something that I think that both kids and adult readers will find very fun, but especially kids, and is also extremely kind of self-indulgent on my part. Would be just a delight to work on.
I think that's what's so great about it is I feel like a big kid when I work on the series, right? Because it sort of taps into when I read those original books, when I flipped through the Monster Manual or the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Player's Handbook, and I wanted all those weapons, or I wanted to envision all those places, or I wanted to have those cool items, they just seem to propagate more ideas and more stories and more potential. That's what it feels like working on the series, is trying to take that lightning and catch it and go, look at what you can do, look at what's possible. And each one begats more fun, imaginative kind of ideas.
All right. Well, I just wanted to let you put some bait on the hook to keep us excited for an announcement on that. So, with that, what kind of projects are you guys working on right now? Just in your own lives, in other areas.
You've got a couple more projects on the go. One of them has been announced.
Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons rules my life right now, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah. What's the book that got announced you can talk about?
The one that I can talk about is DK Press out of the UK is doing a pocket guide to the Forgotten Realms, and they approached me about writing that. It's aimed at readers 7 to 9. It's a little bit of a slightly younger reading level than the Young Adventurers Guides, which was a fun challenge for me. And it's very visual heavy. Like each of the spreads has, there's a strong focus on having like big visual layouts for all the things, but it's basically providing a tour of key places, people, and history notes from the Forgotten Realms, which is one of the iconic Dungeons and Dragons settings, and the one that the recent film and so on is in. So yeah, that comes out in November, I believe. So nice. It's far enough away that I haven't started doing much in terms of promotional stuff on it yet. But yeah, still pretty excited to have that out there. And I've got another as yet unannounced project that I'm working on with a division of Random House that is Dungeons and Dragons related. It's going to be probably more adult, there will be some elements that are kid friendly, I guess, but it's getting into bringing some of my a mix of my Dungeons and Dragons love and also my what I call my compulsive crafting.
I know Andrew's got a book that's coming out in August called Puncheons and Flagons, and that is a cocktail book for Dungeons and Dragons. And he worked with a mixologist, and they've put together all these thematic drinks for the D&D world. So I would be remiss if I didn't pimp that here on the podcast. And you guys should definitely, you can already pre-order it, and it'll be out in August, and it looks wonderful.
Yeah, so there may be some non-alcoholic. Yeah, there may be some kid-safe non-alcoholic cocktails in there, but that would definitely be more for the teachers in your audience.
That's right. That's right. After a long day at school and you need to get yourself a magic missile or something. Yeah.
And how about you, Jim?
So I am the flagship writer on another sword and sorcery property, Conan the Barbarian. And so we relaunched Conan in comics last summer. We're coming up on the first anniversary of this kind of big new publishing initiative for Conan, and it's been a real joy to work on. That's through Titan Comics, Titan UK, the British publisher, and Heroic Signatures, who are the rights holders of Conan that I work directly for on that. It's been amazing. It's been a ton of fun. Conan is the original sword and sorcery hero. I call him the Superman of sword and sorcery, even though he actually predates Superman by 6 years. He's sort of the biggest, hero of the genre, and getting to work on that and have readers. I mean, the character's been in print for 90 years and in comics for 50 years. And so there's a real phenomenal legacy there. And to be the current person holding the baton and running like hell with it is the best. It is awesome. And the readers are amazing. The fan base is really vibrant. And I've been having a ton of fun working on it. So that is taking up the vast majority of my time. I've got a couple other projects, in development, but that's the one I can talk about right now. So, yeah.
And so how about appearances? We're in convention season.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
I just did a signing on Free Comic Book Day, actually in Tokyo, which was a ton of fun. We had a week of vacation in Japan. I was there during Free Comic Book Day, so it was easy for me to set up a signing at a shop there in Tokyo, which was a ton of fun. I don't know when this particular podcast is going to air, but I'm heading to the Robert E. Howard Book Festival in Texas, coming up on June 6 to 8, which is going to be a ton of fun. After that, I'm doing San Diego Comic-Con, so I will be there in late July. Then we are doing Gen Con in August, which is, of course, the big, gaming show. So we will be there in Indianapolis, Indiana. We always have a booth that we share with Howard Taylor, Sandra Taylor, and Tracy and Laura Hickman. And so we will be set up there at the show.
But for anyone who is going to be at Gen Con, just please be warned in advance that San Diego is a 5-day show.
Oh, yeah.
And Gen Con is a 4-day show. And this year they are back to back. So,
no.
Yeah,
Jim in particular may be rather zombie-like.
Yeah, by the time I get to Indianapolis, I'm probably going to be pretty vaporized on the meeting people socializing.
Yeah. You need a pillow and a sleeping bag behind the table.
Yeah, it's gonna. I haven't done both those shows back to back like that before, literally a week apart. So we'll see what's left of me by the end. And this year's the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons, so I'm sure it'll be really chill, very, very relaxed, no problem at all. I'm sure it'll be great. Then I've got a week break, and then after that is Fan Expo Chicago, Fan Expo Canada, which is in Toronto, and then in October we are doing Gamehole Con, which is this amazing show in Madison, Wisconsin that we've never done before, but we've heard nothing but phenomenal things. And we are really, really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited because I'm going to be running a couple of sessions at Gamehole Con that are on their kids programming track. So I'm doing a session for 6 to 9-year-olds and then 10 to 12-year-olds, which is going to be really fun. I'm a little intimidated because I haven't actually, although I've done a lot of DMing, I haven't really had much of a chance to DM for kids before. So I'm really excited. Prep on that has been a lot of fun and a little intimidating.
Yeah. And I'm going to be running, I did GaryCon back in March, which is the Gygax family kind of convention. And I put together a brand new first edition AD&D adventure to celebrate 50 years of D&D, sort of go back to first edition and ran a module in the kind of tone of those original kind of trap-filled, monster, ridiculous, do or die kind of dungeon delve. And it was a ton of fun. I got to play test it across GaryCon. I've run it for a few other groups of friends, and I'll be running that at Gamehole as well.
Wow. You guys are busy, and you get some writing in there someplace?
Yeah, in between, somewhere in there, the writing gets done. Sometimes at airports, sometimes in hotels, but it all gets done eventually.
Those Gamehole Con sessions sound amazing. I think that is both of you. I know I wouldn't be able to sign up for the 6 to 9-year-old, but that would be really interesting to see how that works out.
Stacy been brainstorming a bunch of really, really cool stuff for those adventures, and it's been fun to kind of try and figure out, again, what is that format? What's the best way to engage those players? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I've been
It's
doing
almost
a
like
lot of
research.
actually. Hmm?
I said
Sorry.
it's almost like action. It's almost like action research for your series.
Oh,
To see how
absolutely.
these
Yeah.
kids.
And it's been really, because I have been doing a bunch of online research about, looking for advice on running games for kids, and there's some really great resources out there. So it's been really fun to have an additional reason to delve into that material. So I need to get more of my friends to lend me their small children so I can practice on them.
Practice the D&D.
But when you put it like that, parents are
Sounds
weirdly
weird.
reluctant to let you.
You just drop the kids off. You're like, okay, you're babysitting, sort of.
Well, that's fantastic. As always, you guys are so gracious with your time and giving us a peek behind the scenes of what it's like to put together a book like this and to talk about some of the fun parts about Dungeons and Dragons. So thank you so much. Appreciate that.
It's our absolute pleasure. Like I said, working on these books feels like tapping back into that energy I had as a kid on the series. And so, every time we hear from our readers, we hear from librarians and parents and all that kind of stuff, that this has ignited their kids' imagination, that they gives them a way in to the hobby. It feels really, really special.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time as always. And we look forward to seeing you at Gen Con. We will be at Gen Con, so we look forward to seeing you there and being able to meet you face to face.
That would be amazing. And we will celebrate in 50 years of D&D and many more adventures to come.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, I will wrap things up now. So for Jim Zub, Stacy King, Dan Ream, I am Tom Gross. And folks, until next time, keep rolling those 20s. Talk to you next week.